So we're continuing our discussion of ecosystems, and of course this is ecosystem interactions. So we're going to talk about some of the interactions that take place in an ecosystem. So just kind of sit back, take a look at a couple of the terms that we have, and as we go through, we're going to kind of get more used to some of the stuff on food chains and food web. Now, chances are you've seen and you know what a food chain or what a food web is. You would have seen this in grade 7, but grade 7 was a long time ago. So we're going to kind of recapture some of that information and bring you back up to speed. So here is our first term, habitat, and we talked about this at Wrigley Corners. This is the physical environment where an organism lives. Okay, so that's what a habitat is. This is one of the terms that's on your term sheet. But again, you can look this up in your textbook if you want this definition again. So the physical environment. Of course, we saw different environments yesterday. We were in the forest in the morning. We were at the pond in the afternoon. And we saw two very different ecosystems and different habitats. A niche is the role that an organism performs in an ecosystem, closely associated with feeding. Okay? So a niche is a specific role that an organism plays. And if you're ever wondering, like every single organism has its own niche. It plays its own role in its ecosystem. So there's no organisms that are pointless. There's some that to us seem like they're pretty pointless. Why do these things have to exist? Mosquitoes are an example because they're annoying and they're really, really tiny. But mosquitoes are a really, really big part of ecosystems because they will eat and they are eaten. And that right there is its niche. So you'll notice that different species, their niche includes what it feeds on, what it feeds on, what eats it, and how it behaves. Okay, and no two species have the same niche. These are a couple different examples. Flamingos would have a different niche than, say, a duck, which would have a different niche than some of these other birds that you see here. And they all play a very, very specific role. Okay? A food chain, then, becomes important and grows directly from the definition of what niche is, right? So this is a sequence of organisms, each feeding on the next, and it shows how energy is transferred from one to the other. So you'll notice that this one here starts with pine cones, okay, the seeds of pine cones. And that's kind of like the lowest level of this food chain. And we then come to a red squirrel. You'll notice that the arrow is pointing in the direction of energy flow. So a good way to think about this is, where's the energy from the pine cone going? It's going to the squirrel. Where is the energy from the red squirrel going? In this case, it's going to the weasel. Where's the energy from the weasel going? It's going to the goshawk. Okay? Where do you get your energy from as human beings? There's really only one place you get it from. That's from the food that you eat, right? You get energy from other places, but mainly the predominant source of the energy that you put into your body is from the food that you eat, okay? And so that's what this attempts to show as well. Different things have different niches, which means they eat different things, and that's where they get their energy from. This shows the flow of energy. A couple notes about a food chain. We never show the sun. Yes, the sun is the source of all energy on the planet, blah, blah, blah. But it's not being eaten. The sun is an abiotic factor, which leads to a whole bunch of things, but the sun we do not show in the food chain. Food chains will always start with a plant, which is called a producer. Always. That's the lowest level. They're producers, and that's we're going to talk about what a producer is in a minute. But they always start with a plant. Okay? And the arrows indicate the direction of energy flow. Any questions about food chains? What do you get when you take a whole bunch of food chains and you mingle them all together? A food web. Okay? You'll notice that a food web is now, it's not linear anymore. It's not in a straight line. It's now all kind of jumbled up. But there are food chains within this food web. Okay? So the food web is a series of interconnecting food chains that describe a community. Okay? So a community is a whole bunch of different populations of different species living in the same area, and this describes that flow of energy, but within the community. So we see a couple of examples. Again, there's the pine tree, so the seeds from the pine tree, the red squirrel, the weasel, and then the goshawk, right? So this would go from here to the squirrel, to the weasel, to the goshawk. Now in this community, we notice that there's even something higher than a goshawk, right? A great horned owl. And the food web will change depending on the ecosystem. In some ecosystems, there may not, in some geographical areas, there may not be any great horned owls. So if that was the case, then the goshawk would be at the top of that food chain, right? Whereas in this, there are obviously great horned owls, and then so we include that in this food web, okay? You'll notice the base level are all producers, okay? They're all plants. And from there, things will feed. Questions about food web? Yeah.
Is it possible, let's say, if one thing eats everything, but that other thing also eats that one thing, is it possible to have a double bond with energy?
Like a loop.
Yeah. Would that be like a small possibility? Like, if like those would also be bigger now?
I'm sure that there are examples where that would be a possibility, where you would get a loop within a food chain where two kind of secondary consumers could eat each other. I could see, and depending on who wins, that's where, that's what you would see the energy flow to. But I think for our purposes, we're going to try and keep things a little bit simpler. But yes, I would say that probably could exist. Yeah.
I don't know that would be. So like with some shark species, they're cannibals. That like.
So that would, yeah. So if a shark would eat a shark, then that would be a cannibal kind of, yeah. But again, that's pretty advanced level ecology. So I think we'll keep our food webs a little bit simpler, a little bit more straightforward. But thank you. Those are good questions. Okay, let's go through the specifics. A producer is also called an autotroph. Okay, and this is an organism that makes its own food by the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so plants and algae are examples of this, and this is what we call a producer. Okay, autotroph is a word that means kind of self-energy, right? It can make its own energy using photosynthesis. We'll talk more about what photosynthesis is, especially when we start talking about different cycles, etc. But we've had some exposure to photosynthesis before. Plants are very important for that reason. Okay, a consumer we call a heterotroph. Okay, because they cannot make their own. Their own energy. They need to ingest other organisms. Go ahead. They need to ingest other organisms or organic matter in order to make energy. Okay. So examples of heterotrophs are, of course, humans, wolves, sharks, rabbits. It doesn't matter their size. It doesn't matter what they're eating. It doesn't matter if they're eating something. They're a heterotroph. Okay. Now, there's many layers of different types of heterotrophs. So the first one is a herbivore. Okay. So a herbivore is of course a consumer, but it only eats plants. Okay. So rabbits, squirrels, cows, deer, these are animals, they only eat producers. Okay. You'll notice that there's no distinction on size, right? A rabbit and squirrel are very small, but a cow and a deer would be very, very big. So it doesn't matter how big they are. It all depends on what they eat. And a herbivore would eat only vegetables. Well, plants, okay, producers. A carnivore is an animal that eats other animals, okay? So this is a baby cheetah, sharks, coyotes. Carnivores pretty much are only meat eaters. So they would not eat kind of producers really that much at all. They would only eat meat, right? Because we have a third category, which many of you could guess, and that's an omnivore. And an omnivore is an animal that eats both plants and animals, okay? So chimpanzees, bears, raccoons, and then, of course, humans. Yes? A fox? I don't know. You should Google it. I don't know what the fox's diet is. I would say it's probably a carnivore. I would say mostly it would eat plants. Animals, not plants. Another category of consumer is a scavenger. And this is an animal that feeds on the remains of other organisms. Okay? So yesterday Levi talked about vultures, and vultures certainly are scavengers. However, ants, crows, slugs, hyenas, lobsters. How many of you have ever had lobster to eat before? Yes. Lobsters, crabs, they're scavengers, which means they basically eat dead stuff. Okay? Now, one of the things, actually, interestingly enough, if you ever eat lobster, of course, you wouldn't want to catch it and then eat it instantly because, of course, it's been eating dead things. So what many people will do is they capture lobsters, they feed it a clean diet, things that aren't dead, and allow it to get rid of any toxins or any bacteria that may be in its body, and then they sell it. Right? So that's one of those things. You have to be careful when you're eating scavengers because they have a tendency to be dirty. Right? Crows and vultures can be dirty because they're eating dead things, rotting things. Okay? Last but not least is we're going to leave this category and we're going to talk about decomposers. But for whatever reason, the picture does not line up. Okay? I don't know what happened, but this is not a decomposer.
It's kind of dark.
This is just like the slideshow like default, and this was supposed to be a picture of like a mushroom. Anyways, it didn't work, so whatever. A decomposer is an organism that breaks down detritus. So that's dead plant or animal matter, and it breaks it down into its nutrients. Okay, so bacteria and fungus are two of the different types of decomposers. And so many of us in Kitchener-Waterloo, in like the Waterloo region, now have in our homes green boxes, green bins that we can take out. Does anyone's family have green bins at home? Right? Yeah. So like many of us have green bins where we can take any of our natural kind of food, not plastics or anything like that, but like our banana peels and our apple cores and even like eggshells and stuff like that. We put them into the green bin. And what happens to that? If you're in geography this semester and you've been on the geography trip, you should know. What happens to all this? It goes to a central place and they make compost, which is really nutrient-rich soil because they have bacteria in that soil that breaks down and decomposes all of the plant and animal matter. So these are some of the different interactions that we see in ecosystems, and we're now kind of ready to do our activity.